Photoshop comes with presets and you can make your own. So you may look at a photograph and say, I'm not 100% sure what I should do with this. So this menu shows you a bunch of existing presets that Adobe has provided, including one, for example, it says strong contrast. So you look at that and you say, okay, I think I like that. But again, as I've mentioned before, one of the huge benefits of a preset is it's just a starting point. So when I chose that preset, look, it's made a curve for me. And now if I look at that and say, I really like that, but I would like to try something, I can take any one of these points and adjust accordingly to say even more of this or less of that, or I don't like that point at all. So presets are really nice because they give you a great starting point. Some of the presets in curves, I must be honest, I have not used because I don't have the need to make a color negative or whatever the preset shows. But at the same time, it's not a bad idea to try it and see what it does, and then you can look at, oh, so that's what that, if you wanted that effect, that's kind of what the shape of the curve would be like. Okay? If you, let's pretend for the sake of argument, this was one that I had made myself, and I had, as we talked about, a series of photographs that I knew I was going to be doing similar adjustments to those photographs, then as we talked about the other day, I can go in here and choose Save Curves Preset, and then name it something, and then they would show up. Here's ones that I previously saved. These are clearly demonstration curves because names like My S-Curve and CL Curves is not a very descriptive name as to what it's for. That was more, look, you can save a preset. I'm just going to call it that. So in real life, I would probably have ones that said things like, you know, deeper contrast, mid-tone adjustment, whatever, something that kind of made sense to you. And even though every image you're adjusting, you really want to adjust on an image-by-image basis, there are some recurring themes. People often talk about the S-curve is a very common curve where you're dark. It's almost the equivalent of moving those two triangles in on levels. That's kind of the equivalent of the S-curve. So that's a very common place to start. So even though lots of images are going to look different, you'll find very often that you may start with one of those existing presets or one you make and go on from there. Okay? Let me reset this one again. It also is worth noting, same theory applies. There's a red, a green, and a blue channel. So some people go to the red channel and then do the on-image controls or adjust the curve, green and blue accordingly. I'll show you a method in a moment that requires that because we're going to actually do a very numerical method of using curves. And that's frankly the main way I use curves now, because when I just want to make a photograph look better and adjust it, I use Camera Raw, either starting with the raw file in Camera Raw or starting in Photoshop and using the Camera Raw filter. Okay? So we're going to come back to curves in a little bit, but now I want to...
David, quick before we move on too far, do you mind if I ask a couple questions about it? So Cayenne and one other person wanted to know, I understand how the histogram works in reference to the triangles on levels. How does the histogram relate to the curve and points in curves?
Well, and honestly, the histogram, there's not as obvious a relationship. So the histogram, frankly, didn't even display in the curves panel until recently. Before, it was just a whole separate thing, so people would have both of them open and you adjust the curve and see what it did to the histogram. So it's still, the principle is still the same, where when, for example, in here, if I do any adjustment here, this is kind of like saying the equivalent of moving the black triangle in, and this would be the equivalent of moving the white triangle in, and then, but you're not going to see the histogram readjust itself here. You'd have to have the histogram panel showing. So my personal feeling is when you're using curves, the histogram is less of a reference than it is when you're using levels, but that's just more of a personal preference.
So what happens if you bring one of those dots down and maybe the black one up, because that's more 3D?
Yeah, I mean, you can see that this is more contrasty. So if you're doing this, you're going to take away a lot of the contrast. This is making the dark points darker and the light points lighter. If you just want to say, I want to take the overall image much darker, like a contrast, which there'd be reasons you would do it, not what we're doing here. Okay, we'll get into some examples of where you might actually use those. Okay.